because my intention with this podcast is to build bridges between the East and the West, I try to avoid topics that separate us, which politics and religion, we know, are two topics that we should never really discuss because people are just they have very strong opinions about both. But I want you to talk about the Nakba. You are
Mhm.
Lebanese. You got your PhD in Palestinian political identity. And I thought you would be a good person to talk about the Nakba for the first time on my podcast. And I want to make it just super Nakba 101 because there are a lot of people that don't know what the Nakba is.
Right.
So if you can just share.
Yeah, of course. It's no surprise that people don't know in the West what the Nakba is because it didn't happen in the West. It happened in Palestine. It happened in West Asia, or what would be the Middle East to most people in Western Europe and North America. Um, and just as people, we tend to emphasize and zero in on the tragedies that have to do with us specifically and our history, our personal ancestral history. And because it doesn't look like it's closely connected or connected really in any way to North American, Western European, white ancestral history, it doesn't get mentioned the same way, the Japanese and Korean War doesn't get mentioned, or the Japanese occupation of most of East Asia doesn't get mentioned, or anything that doesn't really happen within the major metropoles just doesn't get mentioned. So the Nakba, and I'm not like the biggest fan of this word, by the way, because the Nakba means catastrophe.
Okay.
And to me, it's always given me the sense of like the catastrophe that can now never be undone. Like when a catastrophe happens, you can't undo catastrophe. But we're doing a lot of work to return a certain balance to this place that has been in so much unrest for the last 100 years. So the Nakba, officially happened in 1948. The Nakba kind of coincides with, or overlaps actually, with the founding of the modern state of Israel in 1948. So if let's say, history is here, the Nakba is one perspective of this history, and then the founding of Israel is another perspective of this history. So they're describing the same thing, supposedly, but they just kind of like these two contradicting histories overlap. They're on top of one another. But really, the Nakba begins, you could say, as early as the founding of Israel, because the Nakba is that catastrophe which allowed the indigenous people of Palestine to lose their land to another people and another power. And plans to colonize Palestine began as early as the 1800s. And, the Zionist movement in Eastern Europe and Russia began around somewhere between 1850 and 1870. And then mass emigrations of European Jews started to happen as early as the 1870s and between the 1870s and the 1890s. And then those immigrations started to intensify in the early 1900s, between 1914 and 1920, so during World War I. Now, up until now, the indigenous population in Palestine, as these people are flooding in more and more, are still like not sure what's going on. Like at first they're accepting these people as people who need refuge, people who are leaving a place where they're being prosecuted and discriminated against. So they're really welcoming everyone who's coming in with opening arms. But then in the early 1940s, when the United States and Britain and other places decide to close their borders to any emigrating Jews to help redirect them towards Palestine, as we're building up towards the Holocaust, as the Third Reich is taking power and Hitler is becoming more and more influential around Germany and around Europe in general in political circles. When the U.S. and Britain and these other places start closing their borders, larger groups of European Jews who are now organized into militias are entering with a lot of force, with just very there's not a lot of force, but a lot of force, but also just in large numbers. And by now, by the early 1940s, there are clashes happening in the land. So at this point, we're post-World War I. And what happened after World War I was the Ottoman sultanates fell, and they fell to British, French, Italian, German, etc. powers. Excuse me again. Not German, sorry, because the Germans were actually on the Ottoman side. But anyways, largely French and British powers. Palestine specifically was given to Britain or taken by Britain. And this is all based on a pencil-drawn map called the Sykes-Picot Agreement between these two men, Sykes and Picot, an Englishman and a Frenchman, and who just cut up the Middle East. Now the French took the places with more Christians in them in terms of West Asia. The French sort of took on this Christo-national mission to create some Christian-dominant nations, specifically like Western Syria, Northwestern Syria, Lebanon, which would become Lebanon, while Britain was geared more towards resource optimization, so splitting up or lumping together really Iraq in such a way that all of the biggest oil reserves would be within one set of borders. And they sort of decided that Jerusalem/Palestine would be an international zone, but controlled by the British, right? So you have this British mandate of Palestine that comes into existence. So what was Syria Philistina in the Ottoman Empire, just southwestern Syria, in the Ottoman Empire, became the British mandate of Palestine. Jordan became the Transjordan. Lebanon became Greater Lebanon later on, like Lebanon as a substate in Syria, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in the British Mandate of Palestine. It's the late 1930s/early 1940s. There are more and more tensions growing in the land because the amount of people emigrating are becoming much more numerous, and they're coming armed. They're coming with money. They're coming with weapons. They're coming aggressively. They're pushing people out of lands. They're buying land from absentee landlords and then encroaching on the boundaries of those of the lands, encroaching beyond the boundaries of those lands. And I want to say about 18% of the land that was taken eventually in 48 was bought. So a lot of it starts with these deals to sell the land by absentee landlords who would like be living in Beirut or in Jerusalem, and they'd be approached by people like the Rothschilds, who bought a lot of this, like a big portion of this percentage of bought land. And there was no connection like between there was already within Palestinian society, within Palestine, there's like this riff between the Falahi, or the peasant population, the farmers population, the farmers who live in the mountains and in the fields and in the more in farming areas, and the people who lived in the city, and wealthier bourgeois landowners. So you would have people living on this like massive several thousand acre piece of land, let's say like 20,000 acre piece of land, living on the land, tilling the land, eating from the land, and paying a tax to the landowner based on like everything they produced in terms of crop and what they sold at the market, etc., etc., etc. And the landlord would generally be living somewhere in the city or on the coast, or like I said, in Beirut or Damascus, like in a more prestigious city or place. So there was no connection there. So when these landlords would sell, they wouldn't communicate with the Falahi population. The people on the land would just be chilling one day, and this army of people would come and start just telling them to get off. Like, this is not your land. This land has been sold. Get off. Go. And they have no idea what's going on, and they have no way of contacting their landlords. They obviously try, and that created even more rifts within Palestinian society itself, and this sense of betrayal between the people still living in a more traditional agricultural way and the people who were embracing these new modernized, colonized bourgeois lifestyles.